Well, my name is Stephanie Sorbet, and I'm going to do a workshop with you guys on positive classroom design and social emotional learning. And we have our UCA Technology Learning Center, Miss Melissa Earls, that's here to help us if we have some tech issues. So we're grateful to have her as well. So this workshop is pretty informative, pretty casual. I'll have some times where I'd like for you to just pop in the chat if you want to comment or share something that you would like to discuss. Also, you might want a pen and paper because there are some reflection times where you may have to look inward and jot down a few things. So you may want just some paper and pen nearby for that. I promise there's no test. But at the end, I'll have a few questions. And if you email me the responses, then I'll send you some great resources that you can use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. The first thing I want to share with you is our UCA College of Ed's online degree programs for a master's. So, and certification. So I'll share that with you now, and then we'll get started. And you'll be able to see this again also. And we have one more coming in. All right, I think we're ready to go. Okay, so our workshop today is positive classroom design through social emotional learning, building a community of learners. A little bit about myself. My name is Stephanie Sorbet, and I am an assistant professor here at UCA in the College of Education in the LC department, which is Elementary Literacy and Special Ed. I'm sure some of you are very familiar with our programs. Maybe we have some UCA graduates in the room as well. I am beginning my 4th year here at UCA. I have experience in Louisiana. I taught public school in South Louisiana for 10 years, and then I was an instructor at a university there. And then we moved, and I've been here for going on starting my 4th year. So been around the block a little bit. Taught elementary grades and worked with pre-service teachers and student teachers. Mentored student teachers in my own classroom, as well as observed student teachers in the field from the university standpoint. Some research ideas and things that I'm interested in is mentoring novice teachers, social emotional learning, and the connection to positive classroom design, classroom management, those kind of things. You know, stuff that's very important to me because I remember being in the classroom and struggling with some of those areas. Also service learning as field experiences for pre-service teachers. Some of the things we like to do for fun, well, we have 3 kids. So I have one at LSU, one in high school here, and one in middle school. And we love riding, baseball, hiking, kayaking, and being outdoors. And if y'all heard my dogs barking, they're going crazy. Every time somebody comes to the door, they go crazy. All right, so here's our little agenda, and you know, I'm not a stickler for this. If we don't stay with it and we get ahead or behind, that's fine with me, but I just want you to kind of see where we're headed today. This morning we'll talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, social emotional learning, and the CASA wheel. Morning meetings. I think a lot of you are here to find out more about morning meetings. You probably already know a great deal about morning meetings, but we'll talk a little bit more. Meeting kids' basic needs with social emotional learning. We'll talk about children in crisis and the need for SEL and guidance. We'll take a quick break, maybe about 10 minutes, depending on how long time we have. And then we'll return and we'll talk about the way we speak to our kids, how we use reminding, reinforcing, and redirecting language, the connection to classroom management with procedures, consequences, that are logical and real world learning experiences, And then at the end, we'll wrap up and talk about where do we go from here, some takeaways in our closing. Okay, so we'll get started. All right, let me see, raise of hands. How many of you have heard of this before? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Anybody heard of that before? Of course, we've all heard of this before, right? So I know that you all know everything there is to know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when I was studying social emotional learning and the connection to our students' needs, I thought to myself, wow, I never looked at it that way. I never thought of it like this. And so it was a light bulb moment for me. And maybe I just was late to the party, but I couldn't believe the connection of how we can meet our kids' needs in our classroom through social emotional learning. So I'll share back and show you guys what I'm talking about. So this kind of of course, we start out at the bottom, basic needs. We know our students have come to us. Some of them are lacking food, water, warmth, rest at home. They may have things going on that are beyond their control, unstable home lives, difficult family situations. And so we move up the chart and we have safety needs, security, safety, and then belongingness and love needs, intimate relationships, friends. Those are psychological needs. So as we move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we can think to ourselves, you know, learning cannot take place if our students do not have the basic needs, physiological and safety. Okay, so if our students are coming to us, and we kind of know this already, if they're coming to us and they didn't have breakfast, they're coming to us and they didn't have a warm, safe place to sleep the night before, it affects their learning capabilities. They're not able to perform as well as other students who may have those basic needs met. And so when you move up to psychological needs, belonging, friendships, if they're coming to school and they may have food, water, clothing, all this at home, and they may have security at home, but they're coming to school and they don't have friends, or they're coming to school and they're being bullied and they're not feeling safe, learning cannot take place because they have anxiety and they're very stressed out over those kind of basic needs not being met. As we move up the charts, we can only hope that our students meet esteem needs, prestige of feeling accomplished, feeling proud about themselves, and then eventually self-actualization, achieving their full potential, including being creative and performing activities, participating in activities that they love. So without the basic needs, learning cannot take place. I'm here today to show you some ways that we can meet our students' basic and psychological needs through the use of social emotional learning and morning meetings so that they can achieve and so that learning can take place. Do we have control over what goes on at home? No. Do we have control over physiological needs at home not being met? Not necessarily. But our job as educators is to meet them where they are when they enter our classroom and try to fulfill and meet those basic needs so that learning can take place. So this little question here in the upper left-hand corner says, what does this have to do with my students and their behavior in my classroom? Well, we're going to make some connections today because students whose basic needs are not being met and learning cannot take place may exhibit challenging behavior. Okay, and this isn't rocket science. We know these things. We've seen this before. And so if they're exhibiting challenging behavior because their needs aren't being met, it's our job to try to meet their needs. That's where social emotional learning takes place. That's where that comes into play. So the CASEL wheel, if you go to www.casel.org, you will find this graphic. And the CASEL wheel is basically a graphic of social emotional learning skills. These are the 5 main components that we use to try to meet when we write social emotional objectives. So self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making, So these are also known as soft skills. And nowadays we know out in the workforce, you not only need to have content knowledge or capabilities in your profession, you also need soft skills, whether it be in the medical world or in the business world. You need to have those communication skills and those people skills to be able to do well in your job and to survive. So let's think about this for a second. And I'd love for you to share in the chat or just speak out. Do we know adults who are needing social emotional learning? Do we know adults? And this could be just a nodding our head or a thumbs up. Yeah, a lot. There may be people in our house that need SEL training. Do we have students in our classroom this past year, or maybe students we've encountered in our building that are lacking social emotional skills? I see a lot of people in the chat. They're saying for sure, a lot. Yes, trauma. And we're going to talk about trauma. Definitely, 100%. There are people in our workforce that we work alongside, the teacher next door, the principal down the hall, the administrator at the school board level meetings. Somebody we know is lacking these social emotional skills. They lack the soft skills. And you sit back sometimes and you're like, why do they treat me like that? What did I do wrong? Well, and it may not be something that you did, right? It may be definitely more something that they're dealing with. And so a lot of times I know at UCA, and I teach the first classroom management class, I have to spend a lot of time with our students explaining to them, hey, you know, the child didn't come to school to misbehave just to ruin your fabulous volcano lesson. They are dealing with something. It has nothing to do with you, right? And so we have to sometimes take a step back and go, hold on, this behavior they're exhibiting in my classroom may not have anything to do with me. Maybe I need to spend some time getting to the root of the problem and trying to figure out, you know, what it is that's going on. Great. I love that you guys are willing to share in the chat. We are going to have a good time. So if we go on and we think about social emotional learning, we can think about this as another subject area. Oops. So as an educator, we're responsible for teaching curriculum, including math, science, ELA, social studies, history, writing, and soft skills. Social emotional learning objectives allows us to focus on both. So these objectives can be embedded within your regular curriculum. So in lower elementary, you may have an overarching skill or social emotional skill that you're working on for the whole 9 weeks or for the whole month, right? And it could just be responsible decision making or making good choices, those kind of things. In secondary, you may be working on social emotional skills for shorter periods of time, just like an overarching theme that's going on in your classroom. Quality social emotional objectives represent competencies that students need in order to grow socially, emotionally, and academically. SEL objectives go deeper than just compliance. It's not just sit it quietly, raise your hands, follow directions. They're often more appropriate for behavioral sets than SEL objectives. So the 5 areas that we want to work on today, and these are the CASEL components: self-awareness. Are they self-aware? Do they understand that their actions can affect others, right? Self-management. If you think in lower elementary, are they able to manage their bodies? In middle school and secondary, are they able to manage their bodies, keeping their hands to themselves, understanding and recognizing other people's space? Social awareness, talking about, you know, the way they speak to others, what's acceptable, how we behave at school and in our classroom. How we treat one another, relationship skills, how we are kind to our friends, how we treat each other with respect, regardless of their background or ethnicity or cultural beliefs, and responsible decision-making. Do they make good choices? Do they work hard, get their work done, and then go to Reading Center? Do they understand that, we have to be responsible and we have to be kind? So those kind of things. So they're very broad, these objectives, these components of CASEL are very broad, and you can kind of gear these to meet your own students' needs. And, it might just be something that you're seeing in your classroom and you want to maybe not follow in any order, but you want to start with one because you see things going on. If there's bullying going on, well, we may talk about, social awareness this 6 weeks. We're going to talk about being kind to others, being a good friend. What is socially acceptable ways to speak to one another with respect. Okay, so I'll pause here for a second and stop sharing, and we'll see if we have any questions, and then we'll move to morning meetings. Oh, I see someone in the text that I wish you could like and love comments. I know, I wish you could do that too on the text. Like when people write in the chat box, I wish you could do a thumbs up or show that you really like what someone else is saying. I really love to read your comments in the chat. I think you'll find the next part of our presentation pretty useful. A lot of times we go to workshops and they have great ideas, but it never really lays it out for me. How am I going to take this and go to the classroom, right? I just want to have a piece of a tool in my hand to go and use it. And so I think you'll find the next part pretty useful. Show of hands or thumbs up. How many of you use or are familiar with morning meetings? We have some people are using the checks and the thumbs up. And so this little book here, have you seen this? This is a great resource, and it may be, I don't know if it's reversed for you to see it, but it's the Morning Meeting book, and it's by Roxanne Cricht and Carol Davis, and this is the 3rd edition. This is actually one of my textbooks for my class. So our students that are coming out of UCA are trained in morning meetings, so they know how to do it. So if you hire them, they'll be able to use this in the schools. But this is a great book, and it goes through step by step how to engage in morning meetings in the classroom. So the information that I'll share with you comes from a variety of sources, but I do use that resource quite often. So let's show you a little bit of the secrets to morning meetings. Okay, so morning meetings. It sets the tone for respectful learning and establishes a climate of trust, motivates children by addressing 2 human needs, the social aspect and the emotional aspect of their needs. Now, children are going to get these needs met somehow through behavior or misbehavior. So if you're not meeting their social needs and allowing them to share with one another, they're going to talk to their neighbor. If you're not meeting their emotional needs when a child comes to school upset, they're going to probably be emotional and cry until you go over and give them that attention. So they're going to get these basic needs met somehow because it's their nature to get their basic needs met. Maslow has taught us that. They're going to get them met whether you provide that or they do it on their own. So the idea behind morning meetings is to meet them where they are, address their needs, meet their basic needs, and it will help minimize behavior. Repetition of ordinary moments tends to lend itself to extraordinary moments. It merges social, emotional, and intellectual learning. Morning meetings should be about 15 minutes, 5 days a week, typically in the morning. You get to know your students, motivate and inspire them, and encourage them to want to be there. So you're already saying, wait a minute, I do not have time. You don't understand. We start the day going to library. First thing in the morning, we have to do our bell ringer activities. There's no time for this. I can't do this. So that is something that I've heard very often. But imagine how much time is gained if morning meetings can minimize some of the discipline disruptions and you actually get to teach uninterrupted. So 4 parts to a morning meeting. We have our greeting, our sharing, our activities, and news and announcements. And it usually takes about 15 to 20 minutes. So if someone could just tell me that if I invest in my children 15 to 20 minutes in the morning, 5 days a week, it will improve relationships, it will build community, I'll get to know my kids, and it'll minimize distractions and disruptions, I'm all in. I'm very interested. So the first part of the morning meeting is the greeting, and that's pretty basic. Students can just turn to one another. They may just say, good morning, how are you doing? Using each other's names for personalization. That's a great skill for the real world. Soft skills are everything. So in the business world, when they are older, trying to get a job, even as a teenager, it would be great for them to learn how to extend a hand, shake hands, say thank you, sir or ma'am. Yes, good morning, whatever it may be. So the greeting lasts about 2 to 3 minutes at most. It's really short. They're typically for a morning meeting, we have them come to the center of the classroom or a carpet or a circle. Those of you that are in upper elementary or middle school or secondary, your students may at first think that this is a little weird that you're bringing them to the circle and the carpet. I do it with the college students, so they do think it's a little weird at first, but then they ask to do it and they want to share and they want to do it. So that's the greeting. So you bring them to the carpet. You know, you can play a little bit of music every morning. It's very consistent. You do it at the same time every day. If you have a pullout or a class to go to on Tuesdays, well, you might just do it right after that on Tuesdays, but maybe every other day of the week, they start at 8 o'clock or 8:30, 20 minutes max. They do the greeting and then you go into a sharing. And so the sharing is a time for them to really just share about something that is on their mind, you know, something that's going on in their world. If you don't allow for these things, they're going to do it anyway. So they may be sharing about their slumber party in the middle of your math lesson. But if you give them that time in the morning, it may help to minimize some of those off-task behaviors later. So you as a teacher encourages sharing, but you never force this. They can turn to their partners and share, like a turn and talk. The teacher can decide. They may want to pose a question and the whole group can share. I'll give you some examples in a little bit also. But you would never force a child to talk. They can just take turns, or they can pass that time and not share. Then you move into an activity. An activity is a planned group game or a team building activity. Focusing on something that the whole group does together as a team. Then you have a little debrief after and discuss what was learned. This is usually the point where you embed the social emotional learning skill. So if you're working on, you know, any of the 5 CASEL components and you want to incorporate that, this will be a time where you would talk about responsible decision making or any of those 5 areas. And whatever it was that they worked on for the team building activity ties into your specific skill that you're working on at that time. The last part of the morning meeting is kind of just a transition time. Maybe you're ready for ELA or it's time to change classes and go to social studies. Maybe it's time for biology or whatever it may be, but it's time for you to say your agenda. Okay, hey guys, this is what's going on today. We have a math quiz. We're about to move into a new social studies unit. You're going to do a science experiment. We have class pictures today. Yearbook orders are due. Friday, we have a field trip, whatever it may be, but this transitions you out of the morning meeting and into your daily routine. So all of this together does take some time and practice. And I would say the first few weeks, it's going to take longer than 20 minutes. But after a while, your students should get the hang of it. They get the routine. They love doing it because you're always keeping it fresh and engaging. And you'll find that soon it will be very structured and organized, and it should not take more than 20, 25 minutes. Some benefits of morning meetings: we learn about our students, their backgrounds, and provide a better diverse learning experience. So if you learn about where your kids come from or the things that they're dealing with at home, it can help you to be more sensitive and have more empathy as they go throughout their day, if they struggle with something or if you notice their emotions are running high. We can accommodate individual needs, wants, and likes and dislikes. We gain empathy and understanding when we're managing classroom behaviors. We gain insight to students who may be in crisis or dealing with difficult situations. And we're going to talk a little bit more about children in crisis. But morning meetings just give us a time for your kids to be themselves, to share what's going on in their world, and to gather support and encouragement from peers, and you, the teacher, to do your very best in your classroom. Okay, so we're going to drop in the chat box. Thinking about the classroom you just came out of this past school year, or the group of students you may have worked with in your building, which part of the morning meeting do you think your students would enjoy and why? The greeting, the sharing, the activity, or news and announcements? I'm reading some of the chats. I see Maggie saying that they use it every day. They use morning meetings. High school students, yes, it's difficult. I will say middle and secondary are going to be difficult at first because they're going to think you're a weirdo. And then you're just going to act like it's so much fun. And you're going to be, come on, everybody, we're doing it. And then eventually they are asking you to do morning meetings because they want that share time. Sharing, connecting with the students. They already think we're weirdos. Yes, they do. And thinking about how to do it online. So that was such a challenge. It's such a challenge to do that. And last year during COVID, I had to initiate morning meetings with my college level students. And, it's like, okay, we're going to figure this out. And it was great. We did, they were able to do greetings. You could put them in little small groups. They could do sharings together with everyone. You can come up with some types of activities. And so it's tricky and you have to kind of figure it out. But they also learned how to create morning meetings virtually as well. So it was a great learning experience, not only for me, but for the students. Secondary teachers, it's difficult because you're limited with your time. So, at the end of the day, if your morning meetings start out just 3 days a week, you're still doing better than you did before when you weren't doing any. So I would start out small, set little goals, see how it's going. Maybe, Wednesdays and Fridays are your morning meeting days with secondary. The goal in lower elementary is to do it 5 days a week. As our students get older, you may notice that you can get away with it, 3 days a week. But it's definitely consistently something you would want to do more than just once a week or once a month. It's definitely a check-in time. Older kids may be able to regulate emotions and understand the CASEL, components a little bit better, but not always. Sometimes they struggle and they do need that time. And just by you having these meetings, you open up those lines of communication. So it's more, it'd be a better chance of a student coming to you and saying, hey, Miss Bowling, I really have something I'd like to talk to you about, or can we really spend some time and just chit chat? This is what's going on in my world. And they might not have been encouraged to do that had you not opened those lines of communication. All right. I love the chat. Keep it going. Keep it going. Okay, so let's move on. Some sharing ideas. So here's some morning meeting sharing ideas. What do you like to daydream about? What makes you happy? If you could do anything right now, what would you do? What would be your dream job? If you were a superhero, what would your name be? What powers would you have? What makes you feel loved? So after the students do a greeting and they're sitting in the circle or they're together, then you're ready for the sharing. So they can turn to a partner and each share. You can say you have 2 minutes to share and then time's up and the next person shares. Or you might have them do that first and then as a whole group, they can share out. How do you show people you care? What school rule would you change? If you could add a pet to your family, what would you add? Notice that the questions are not things like, where did you go on summer vacation? Tell us about a pet in your household. They are pretty open questions, not to cause students to say things like, well, I didn't go on summer vacation, or where we live, we're not allowed to have pets. So be mindful when you do sharing that everyone is able to participate, and try to ask open-ended questions that they could answer no matter who the student is or where their background, where they're from. Okay, so here's your sharing question for today. If you wrote a book, what would it be about? So feel free to drop it in the chat, or if anyone wants to unmute and just kind of share. If you wrote a book, what would it be about? Food. I would read that book. Travels. Cookbook. And it's kind of amazing the things that our students will come up with, because they're so creative, and it's just a fun time for them to share what's on their mind and what they're thinking about. The children's book. Heavy metal hairbands from the 80s. Yes. These are great. So I'll show you this little game I bought online, and it's just called Let's Mingle. And there's tons of these little box games. I mean, you can get this stuff on Scholastic, or I think this was on Amazon. But what it is, it's a huge box of cards. And I don't know if there's like 300 cards in here, but they are little cards to get them sharing. So the questions are, and they just look like this: let's mingle. If you could have anything in the world, what would it be and why? Right. And so you could have these once a day. I mean, this is, do not reinvent the wheel. There are so many tools and tricks out there that you can use for morning meetings. And this is just one example. If you could make up a new holiday, what would it be and what would you call it? What is something you don't know how to do that you wish you could do? So they're great conversation starters, and they're great things for them to get started sharing. At first, you might find that students are not too interested in sharing. They're uncomfortable. Some of them may not want to do it, and they're like, just make this activity end, please. Okay. Well, after they see that this is a morning meeting routine, you're going to do this like every morning, you're doing this every week, this is never going away. You'll notice that those barriers start to break down and they start to want to participate. So be very encouraging with the first few students who really interested in sharing. Tell them that you're so happy it made your day that they're willing to share, and then you'll start seeing that ripple effect, and they'll start catching on. And it'll take a little while, but they do it. So lots of resources for sharing, and that's part of the morning meeting. And sometimes, that can take a while. And as teachers, we might have to say, okay, we've shared a lot today. We want to move on to our activity because I have something so exciting. So hold those thoughts, and later this afternoon, we may have some more time for sharing, right? So, be careful, because these kindergartners will share all day long if you let them. All right. Great ideas. So here's some activities, morning meeting activities. So after you've done your greeting and your sharing, you're moving into your activity. And so here's just some examples. Who am I? With small groups, you can break them up into little groups and they can play a game, providing clues with the answer and hints until they guess who the mystery person is, and they can go around the group doing that. Twister. I've actually done Twister with my college students. It was kind of crazy, but they enjoyed it. So you'll have someone calling out the colors. I did it in small groups, so there was only about 5 or 6 per twister board. And then the teammates, they move on the game spaces and you cheer on your team. And it's team building, right? So you're trying to get them to cheer each other on, and it builds that camaraderie in your classroom. Jenga, each classmate takes turn trying to move a block for Jenga and stack it. The class cheers on each other, so it's an individual activity. Each one gets a turn. When the tower finally falls, we teach our students to support one another, and we say, that's okay, that's okay. We'll do better next time, right? And they can beat their whole class average. And then a team cheer. This is really easy. This is kind of a no-brainer. Kids love to do this, all ages, even the secondary. Divide the class into small groups of 5 or 6. Have them create their own group name and cheer about their group name. Give them about 5 or 6 minutes or so, and then they get to share their cheers with the class. And so that's just, I just want to break it down for you so you can see that it doesn't have to be rocket science. Morning meetings can be very easy, very laid back, because the goal of it is you just to have a very relaxed environment for them to get to know one another and for you to get to know your kids. So we know morning meetings help us build community in our classroom. We know this, okay? We've talked about this. You've seen this before. Morning meetings are a great way to build community, get our students to know each other, teach them to love one another and be respectful no matter what their background is. But now comes the meat of the lesson today. Let's connect our social emotional learning with meeting our students' needs. So we've talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we talked needs, psychological needs, and then we've talked about social emotional learning from the CASEL wheel, self-awareness, self-management, all of these components. And so now we need to think about how these things tie together. These basic needs down here, food, water, warmth, and rest, security and safety, belongingness and love needs, some of these are met at home, some of these are met in the classroom. Through the use of social emotional learning objectives, self-awareness, self-management, relationship skills, responsible decision-making, social awareness, we can hone in on lessons and activities in our morning meetings that focus on these areas to help improve and meet these basic needs of our students. Is a morning meeting going to help a child who doesn't have food and water at home? No, it may not. Is a morning meeting and a chance for them to share how they're feeling about things going on at home going to help them do better in school? Yes, it may. So it may help with the psychological needs, help them to feel a part at school, to feel like a part of a family, to establish friendships, to have belongingness at school, and to feel better about themselves. When kids feel better about themselves and feel a sense of belongingness, they're going to perform better. They may not make all A's and B's. They may still struggle in schoolwork. This is not going to fix their deficit areas in learning. But what it's going to do is it's going to improve their well-being, and it's going to help them to want to be there. If they want to be there, they're going to tend to behave better because they want to keep coming back and they want to be in your presence and in your classroom. So moving right along, we said earlier we were going to talk a little bit about children in crisis. So a crisis situation is any circumstance or situation that results in the feeling where they can't problem solve or use coping skills, right? So they're struggling with something going on. It could be that they have an adverse childhood experience. It could be that mom and dad are divorcing. It could be that we just moved to a new town. It could be, they have a home life that's just fine and dandy, but mom works out of town right now, and so they're missing mom. So it could be a lot of different things going on. But children that are in crisis situations are children that are dealing with adverse childhood experiences, things like poverty, things like abuse, neglect, drugs or alcohol at home. They may be in foster care, right? So these are the kind of things that a child in crisis is dealing with. And we have students in our classroom. There are some great websites and books on adverse childhood experiences. Nadine Burke Harris wrote The Deepest Well, and that's an excellent book that talks about ACEs and how we as adults still cope and deal with trauma from our childhood experiences and the effects it has long term. And Ruby Payne, she's written Emotional Poverty, and that's another great read. And it just talks about regulating one's emotions. And so social emotional learning helps us to work with our students and to teach them at a very young age how to be resilient and how to overcome some of these crisis situations, and still be able to, do the things they need to do and do well in the classroom and build that community. So crisis intervention is used in mental health fields to refer to methods to offer immediate short-term help to individuals who might be experiencing emotional, mental, physical, and behavioral distress. Teacher involvement in children's crisis situations is more long-term, often after the peak of the crisis. Childhood trauma refers to experiences that threaten life or physical integrity and is so powerful that it overwhelms a child's ability to cope and regulate. These children come to our classroom and they may exhibit challenging behavior. And it's because they cannot cope and adapt and regulate emotions to what's going on with them at home. And so our job is to help them feel safe, help them feel comfortable, help them feel a part of that classroom community. And SEL and morning meetings do that. If you're questioning students you've had in the past and you're thinking now, did I have a student in a crisis situation? And some of you already know. Did I have a student that went through some adverse childhood experiences? Here are some examples: extreme poverty, homelessness, foster care, death or loss of a loved one, severe automobile accident. Notice bullying is here. Bullying is a crisis situation. If a child is being bullied, they are fearful for their life. They are scared to death going to school. Health situations are painful medical procedures. Witnessing or experiencing community violence are things that have gone on in their home. Life-threatening are natural disasters, family dysfunction, and natural disasters. I remember being in the classroom when Hurricane Katrina hit. And so that was a very difficult situation. And in South Louisiana, we had been out of school for probably, 2 or 3 weeks, couldn't get back to our home. Luckily, we had minimal damage, but we had an influx of students that were coming from the New Orleans area that had lost everything. I mean, they lost all their toys, they had lost loved ones, they had loved ones misplaced and out of state now. And it was just a very difficult time, for our kids to now have to come back to school and talk about math, science, social studies. But they were so grateful to be in a safe place and to come back and see, friends or to make new friends. And that was what mattered to them. So we are at a little break now. We're going to get to a little break time. And I'm going to put a question up. We'll have about 10 minutes. And I'll put this little question up. You can drop in the chat while we're having our break. What connections are you making? How does this workshop affect your classroom or profession as an educator? So I have 10:46. And so what I'd like to do is come back at about 10:55 or so and give you guys a 10-minute break. Hey, welcome back. I'm reading some of the comments in the chat and I took a few notes. Addie mentioned restorative justice. Yes, and we're going to talk a little bit about that and just maintaining our students' dignity, especially when disciplining and when reminding them of rules and procedures. Bethany, making some connections to safe schools and our students feeling comfortable and safe there, regardless of where they're coming from. Just some great comments. Some of us are working virtually with students and they have experienced ACEs. Just some great conversations that we're having here. The next part of our presentation is going to require us to do a little, I guess, inward looking. So you may want to share in the chat, but you may find that you're more comfortable just jotting down your ideas. But it's going to be a time for us to really look at the things that we're doing in our classroom and what we might need to improve on. No one's pointing the finger. No one has to even know the things that you're doing in your classroom. So we're all going through this together, but just have a little piece of paper down for you so you can jot down some ideas and thoughts as we go through this next section. So we're going to do some SEL-F assessments, self-assessments, which are social emotional learning checks. So throughout the next portion of the presentation, you'll be asked to make some self-assessments. Take a hard look inward at what you typically do in your classroom and assess the levels in which you address your students' social and emotional learning needs. Some of us may not have ever thought of addressing our social emotional learning needs of our students, and that's okay. This is a learning process. This may be uncomfortable for us, but we are growing. Respond on a notepad for your own personal reflecting so that later you can come back to these. And if you feel brave, you are invited to share in our chat also. So I do this little activity with my students as well, and we talk a lot about the way we speak to our kids. And I have them, they go out to the field and they take notes and they learn from the mentor teachers that they observe, the ways that we speak to our students, having patience, teaching rules and procedures, and making sure that as educators, we're always a role model and setting an example for our students, and that we speak to them with the same respect that we expect from them. So we talk about 3 types of languages, and this comes from Paula Denton's book, The Power of Our Words. I don't have a hard copy with me, but I'd love to share it with you. It's a great book. It's an easy read, and it pretty much reprograms us in the way we speak to our students. She tells us we have 3 types of languages. We have reinforcing language, reminding language, and redirecting language. So reinforcing basically just tells us to reiterate our rules and procedures. And so if you come from a time period where in college you were taught about Harry Wong, procedures are everything. If you haven't heard of Harry Wong, send me an email and I'll send you lots of good stuff. But he believed that as a classroom manager and a teacher, we should have procedures for everything. Restating these procedures is also important in our classroom. And we know the first 2 weeks of school we spend not on academics, but on practicing rules and procedures in our classroom, especially in elementary grades. These procedures are posted on your walls, they're made known, you practice them, and you are always pointing to these procedures to reinforce what you expect. So we set our expectations, we create procedures for lining up, procedures for sharpening pencils, procedures for when the bell rings. The bell does not dismiss you, I dismiss you. All of those things. And we reinforce that with our students. Okay. That's the first and foremost thing that we can do for our kids to set a safe learning community. Then we start to notice students forget the procedures. Okay. Or they forget the rules. Now, they may not forget, they may be choosing to not follow them, but we're going to assume that they just need a reminder. So the next type of language we're going to use, according to the power of our words, is reminding language. And we're going to state reminders to our students. Those of us that have taught lower elementary, we have reminded until we've lost our voice, and we reminded some more, because that's about how it goes, especially in those lower grades. So an example might be, remember, Joseph, we always walk to the library. So if Joseph's running, instead of saying, go move your clip, you're punished, you lost your recess. No, we're just going to remind him of the procedure. We've already taught the procedures. They have learned this since day one. Remember, Joseph, we always walk to the library. Okay, that's kind of his warning. That's a reminder. Then redirecting students to adjust their behavior. When we see off-task behavior, we're going to remind them first. But then after a little while, we notice that it may be occurring again. We're going to have to redirect that behavior. Joseph, I have already reminded you that we walk to the library, and now I am watching to see you do this correctly. So redirecting language is a little more firm. You have already reminded, and now you are redirecting. This is what we're going to do. And you're going to stand there and you're going to watch that the child does what you expected. And the consistency there is so important. And I do find that pre-service teachers, like in our program, they struggle with that because they just want to say, okay, here's your reminder. Okay, here's your reminder. And they'll remind and remind. And so there's a balance, right? We have to be sure there's a balance, because after so many reminders, well, now it's a different situation. So reinforcing language names and affirms a positive behavior. Okay, you've already taught the procedures. Now let's reinforce them. The children build on their strengths. It tells children what they're doing right. I see the way you're following the procedure for lining up. I see the way you turn in your assignments to the basket. That is following our procedures, right? It focuses on what children need to do, not what they need to stop. Okay, so down here you have your first self-assessment, and you can jot down a little note to yourself on your notepad or type it in the chat. How do you reinforce your procedures in your classroom? Consistency, yes. And sometimes we're really quick to say, I told you to line up, you're still not doing it. Now I'm watching. But then we turn around and go get some papers off our desk, and we really aren't watching. And that tells the child that you really don't care if they follow that procedure. But if you stand there and you say, I'm watching, still watching, and it's not like we have all day to do this, right? But a few times until they realize, hey, this teacher's serious, they mean business, I have to follow the procedures, right? If you constantly remind yourself that we're always going back to the procedures, that's the main goal here. It's not about punishing, it's not about catching them, getting them in trouble. It's always about, are you following the procedures? Then you are always going back to those, and you don't have to worry about, saying something you shouldn't, sending down some extreme punishment. It's just always goes back to our procedures. I see some great comments. Have the child repeat back what they're expected to do. Yes, that is definitely a great way for them and for other kids to hear too, because sometimes it doesn't register with the kids because you're speaking all day long and they just hear you talk. But if you have another student repeat back the procedure, sometimes it gets other students' attentions. They kind of pay attention because they're hearing a peer say that. Great, keep sharing. So moving into, let's go on from here. Procedures. We won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but we can't reinforce procedures unless we establish them first. So if you've never told your students what's expected, you can't hold them accountable. Same as your principal. If your principal never told you lesson plans are due on Thursdays the week before, or they never told you you're expected to be on duty until a certain time every afternoon, the last bus leaves, whatever it is, if they never give you those expectations for the procedures, how can they hold you accountable for that? Okay, so if you don't spend the first 2 weeks of school teaching your procedures, helping them to role play, teaching them, showing them when you go to the restroom, you come right out, you don't spend a long time in there, teaching them how to line up, teaching secondary students, they don't get to jump up and run when the bell rings, they have to wait till you dismiss them. If you don't teach those things and role play and practice those first 2 weeks of school, you can't hold them accountable for it. We should remind the students of these as needed with reminding language. And then we should redirect behavior to consistently have the students get back on track. Okay, here's your next self-assessment. Which procedures do you use most often? What do you find in your classroom? Which procedures are you most often using? You're very grateful you have those put into place. Things that are non-negotiables. And you can jot it down in your notepad or you can share it in the chat. So reminding language, just a little more detail, it prompts children to remember established expectations and to make decisions about their behavior. And it communicates the teacher's belief that you believe they can succeed. So you're reminding them, let's remember the procedure for sharpening pencils is blah, blah, blah. Let's remember the procedure for, turning in assignments is it goes in this basket. Let's remember, right? So you're reminding them of the procedure. It goes back to your procedures. Okay, just looking at the chat, some transition procedures, things they have to do now. Junior high is a little different. It's very important to have those procedures of entering the classroom in junior high. They cannot come in high-fiving, jumping up and down, being loud. They probably enter, unpack, get started on their bell work or get started on an assignment. That is a life-saving procedure because it keeps those hormones at bay and it keeps them from, running around the room, being loud and interacting with friends. And if they know there's a morning meeting coming, they know they're going to have time to share and they're going to have time to get that out. Okay, another self-assessment. How do you remind your students on a daily basis of your procedures and expectations? And I have to talk to our students a lot of times because they want to give lots and lots of chances. And they say, well, you're telling me I just have to do reminding and redirecting language just all day long. I'm like, okay, but at some point we're not a doormat, right? And at some point, after you have restated the procedure, reminded and redirected, and the child continues the misbehavior, now it is a choice. Now they are choosing to not follow your procedure. So now you have to come in with a consequence, right? A logical consequence, something to where they understand that these are the parameters of the rules here. And you can't, I'm not going to stand here and just give you, constant reminders after you are now choosing to misbehave, right? So I don't want you to think that I believe that you're just going to stand there all day long and say, remember, let's remember. No, at some point we're like, okay, learning has to take place. The behavior has to stop. And so after redirecting language, then we'll talk about some consequences. So our last self-assessment we're thinking about now as we move forward, how do you remind your students on a daily basis of expectations and procedures in your own classroom? Are these posted on the wall? Are you reminding them by stating them again? Do they have a copy of procedures in their folder? What are you doing to remind them? Redirecting language comes after you have reinforced the procedures, reminded them of it, and now you're going to give a clear, non-negotiable message and instruction when students are completely off track of expectations. It imposes a little bit of control to keep children safe and productive. It names a desired behavior specifically and clearly. It's always a statement. It's never a question. You're not going to go over to a student and say, "Why are you running? Why won't you do your work? What is the problem? What is going on here? How come you never can sit still?" Okay, this is not redirecting language. Sometimes we are pushed to say things like that, and we must resist. What we want to say is in a calm, non-judgmental voice with comfortable body language, we want to go over and communicate exactly what needs to be done, redirecting them to follow the procedure. Okay, we are going back to the procedure again. Communicate that the teacher can trust the student to follow the expectations and keep order in the classroom. And it promotes that Maslow's basic needs of psychological and physiological and physical safety. Self-assessment. Who do you generally have to redirect in your classroom? So thinking about the students you have just worked with this past year, who may have been, and I don't really need names, this is just a time for you to really think about, but who may have been students that you found, you reinforced the procedure, you reminded them of the procedure, but you always had to go a step further to redirect their behavior. These are your students that require just a little bit more. And then maybe they get it, after you've redirected, maybe they get it. And sometimes they push our buttons, right? And so think about those students. Think about your interaction with those students and how you address them. And do you notice the ones that may have required more redirecting than others more often? Okay, so we're at a point here where we're going to do a little self-assessment spot check. And so I want you to think about this, and we can have a little open conversation if anyone wants to share, or if you have anything you want to put in the chat or comment. Do you currently, and it's okay if you don't, because we're here to learn, have well thought out and structured procedures for every activity? Literacy stations, entering and exiting the classroom, sharpening pencils. Do you teach the procedures for each activity early in the year? Do you rehearse with the class so that procedures become routines, meaning they don't need to question how things are done? They don't have to ask you, where do I turn in this paper? What do I do with a note home? When will you post grades? Do you reteach a procedure when necessary and praise them to reinforce when appropriate? So to kind of get your wheels rolling and to get you thinking about this, I'm going to give you some examples of procedures. Now, we are seasoned teachers. We have established our classroom. We know which procedures we want. But here are some examples of procedures that are needed in our classroom. These are some things that may prevent our students from needing that reminding and redirecting language. Do you have a procedure for entering the classroom? For dismissing at the end of the day? For returning after an absence? Do your students know what to do when they come back after they've been out for a few days? Maybe they were absent due to COVID. Maybe they were sick with the flu. What is the procedure when they come back to the classroom? Arriving to class tardy, quieting the class. In our elementary grades, do you hold your hand up and say, give me 5? Do they have a callback? Are they using some whole brain teaching techniques to get the classroom's attention? What are you doing at the beginning of the period or the day? Asking for help. How are they moving around the room and turning in papers? How are they listening to and responding to your questions? Do they blurt out? Do they raise their hand? How do they work cooperatively? Do you have jobs within groups? And how do they turn in papers? Just remember, you cannot expect students to follow procedures if you didn't teach the procedure first. Three steps to teaching procedures. Explain, state, explain, model, and demonstrate. Rehearse and practice under your supervision. And reinforce, which means reteach, rehearse, practice, reinforce the class procedure until it becomes a student habit or routine. Sometimes we have to reteach these after a long or Christmas. We come back and we have to do another week of practicing routines and procedures, trying to make sure they remember what's expected. It seems like it's going to take a lot of time, and you have to teach math. You don't have time to do all this, but I promise if you invest in the time in your students to teach these procedures, you're going to notice a difference. They're going to know what's expected. You're going to spend less time reinforcing, reminding, and redirecting, and more time on your lessons and the things that you want to do. We always have a good laugh, and I tell my students, you know, when we talk about procedures, you need a procedure for sharpening pencils. And I always say pencil sharpening is the #1 leading cause of early teacher retirement in America. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I said, if you don't get a grip on pencil sharpening, it will be the end of you, right? And then, you know, I remember a time when I would say, well, I guess I have to blame the economy on pencils because they're kind of crappy nowadays. And then they sharpen them down and they're like this big and they're trying to write with them. So like all these problems, you know, and a student will raise their hand and say, oh, just get an electric pencil sharpener. Okay. And then they burn up in 2 days and you're buying another one at $30, right? So you need a procedure for that. So I would say, here's the procedure. You get a Kleenex box and you empty it. Okay. And then you put the Kleenex box that's empty on top of the pencil sharpener. And you tell the class the procedure for pencil sharpening is the pencil sharpener is closed. That's the procedure. There is no sharpening of pencils. Don't ask. You will pick 2 students, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. They'll work together. They'll sharpen all the pencils at the end of the day. The next morning, they'll come in. If they're not finished, they'll sharpen the rest of them. Every table gets assigned amount of pencils, whatever. You run out of those pencils, you've got a pack of crayons you can use. I don't know, but you better get a plan because it's going to drive you crazy. And so we talk about those kind of things. And I said, in your first year of teaching, everything that drives you crazy, write it down and get a procedure for it, because it will make your life so much easier the next year. And so, you know, they don't always understand that until a couple years later. I'll get an email or I'll see them in Target and they're like, hey, remember that? What you told us? Yeah. So, you know, thinking about procedures and pencil sharpening seems to always have been the worst. Comments, questions? So we're moving into the last part of our presentation, and we're going to talk about consequences. And so this may engage some of us in some comments or opinions, and that's fine. I welcome that. The biggest thing that I want to get across is, you know, every school is different. Every culture of every school is different. And so the ideas that we present today and talk to you about are based in research, and they're things that, you know, have been written, but you still have to go back to your classroom. You still have to do things the way that, you know, you feel that your school expects you to do. So when we talk about consequences and how it ties into social emotional learning, to morning meetings, and to the way we speak to our kids, we have to remember we're not the punisher. Taking recess away is ineffective. And so say that again, taking recess away is ineffective. You know, and I talk to our students and I say, you're going to get a job in a school, and the whole school believes that if the students don't do their homework or they misbehave, you know, they're going to take recess away. And I remember being in that situation. I was a teacher in the classroom, and all the teachers around me took recess away, and they did recess detention and all these things in 3rd grade. right? And, I tell our students, like, you can choose to be a leader in your school, right? And try different methods and more logical consequences, or you can go with the status quo and just do what your whole school does. I said, but I'm giving you evidence, I'm giving you information on better ways to handle misbehavior. So use reinforcement of rules, procedures, and expectations. Use reminding language. Use redirecting. But if at some point you have reminded and redirected and the behavior continues, you're going to have to go over there. You're going to have to provide some type of consequence. This is not how we behave in this classroom. So now we're going to talk about it. Time away from an activity such as literacy stations or math centers is not fun for kids. They don't want to come and talk to you. Okay. So them having to take a time away and come and have a chat with you at your desk or in the hallway is a consequence. That's a punishment right there. They don't want to do that. So you can stop right there if the behavior improves. There's no need to add another punishment or another consequence on top of that. If they're a little bit older, they may be able to write a behavior reflection. If they're being mean to a friend, you have reminded, redirected, whatever the case may be, and the behavior continues, it's time for a behavior reflection. And we might have to send it home for parents or guardians to read and to sign, right? They may have to have a time away. They may have to have a parent conference where they come and sit in as well, right? I'm not saying that we don't have consequences, but we're saying to have logical consequences, right? Taking recess away from the child who needs to run and play, and they don't get their energy out. We know what happens after recess. They come right back in and they're going to exert that energy anyway. So, here at UCA, we try really hard to work with our students and to teach them to try some logical consequences when the reminders and the redirecting don't work, and to use calling the office as a very last resort or an extreme clause. One thing we don't want to come across as is a teacher who can't handle their business. We don't want to be the teacher who's always calling the office for assistance or help. We want to be able to handle our business, but if it's an extreme situation, such as a fight or something that's beyond our control, we want to get an administrator in the room. We want to call the office and seek help. But I guess our main goal here is to make sure that our students know there are going to be consequences, whatever they may be, and have those posted so students know. You may be reminded and redirected to follow our procedures, but after that, you may have to have a conference with the teacher, have a behavior reflection, and it be sent home, have time away from the activity, or have a parent note home or a parent-teacher conference. I see something, Julia said, amen. Well, and that's, and procedures are everything. I'm looking up in the chat, and it's difficult because we get tired. We're tired, and our administrators have us covering so much curriculum, and we don't have time to spend 20 minutes having a chat about why they can't sit nicely during math centers. I mean, we do not have time for that, but we have to figure out a way to spend a little bit of quality time having those conversations with our students so that they understand we have a great fun time here. This is a great learning community. We do morning meetings. We have so much fun. If you want to continue to participate and be a part of this, you got to play by our rules, and so it's not a quick fix. Morning meetings is not going to stop the child from, throwing pencils at another child, right? It's not the cure-all, end-all. But if we start teaching these social emotional learning skills and we build that community, you will see decreases in misbehavior. You will see improvements in that camaraderie and that friendship that you're trying to include. So consequences should be appropriate and encourage learning from mistakes. After you have reinforced, reminded, and redirected the behavior, it still doesn't improve. Well, now it's time. Talk with the teacher outside of class. You want to maintain their dignity, the restorative justice piece we talked about. You want to make sure that you're not embarrassing. You don't shout out or say, get out in the hall and let me talk to you. What is your problem? Okay, we're not doing that. We're saying, come talk to me. And you go stand outside of the class so that the other students don't hear. believe me, the other students know what's going on, and it's probably enough for them to get the message too, but you want to maintain their dignity because you're trying to make sure that that child understands, I still love you. You're still part of this family. It's the behavior that we have to correct. Time away to reflect, all while maintaining their dignity. Make the consequence a positive learning example that provides the opportunity for the child to improve the behavior. When I'm talking to my students, I have to kind of break it down on a college kid level. And I say, you know, you run the stop sign, the police officer's going to pull you over, and I doubt they're taking your recess away. And they're like, oh, right. Yeah. Real world. Okay. We're trying to make it real world here. He's not taking away your recess. He's having something. Blocks in kindergarten. Well, now you can't play centers. And also we're going to go on and pick up all the blocks because that's what you did. That's a direct consequence, right? So, you know, just thinking about some of those real world consequences and stepping away from, you know, punishing, taking recess away, yelling. You know, we're trying not to exert our energy and any more than we have to. And we're trying to not make our students fear us or be afraid to come back tomorrow. Okay, so we have just two little things left to talk about, and then I'm gonna leave you to answering a few questions. So tying it all together, and I would love for you guys to speak out and us have a little conversation here, but if we want to meet our students where they are emotionally and socially, we must provide social emotional learning lessons that help us to do this. Through morning meetings, we can learn about our students and teach these social emotional learning skills, the 5 CASEL components, all while meeting their basic needs. Could it be that through SEL, our students can have their basic needs met and possibly begin to thrive in our classroom? You know, I don't know. Could that be a possibility? You know, we're still trying to figure that out. When students thrive in their environment, they want to be there. When they want to be there, behavior and morale improve and they achieve more. All right, any comments? I have one last slide, which is some little questions, but it's kind of for you to email. So this brings us to a stopping point where we can really just have some open conversations. We can unmute and we can just talk about it. Takeaways? Things you disagree with?
I think one big thing that I really like to think about when you're talking about consequences and things like that is after you give that consequence, after you've delivered that negative experience, that you reframe very quickly to the positive. This is how we can do better in the future. This isn't the end of the world. This isn't a black mark on your character. This is, look, the next time we do this, I bet we're going to do a lot better at it. So being able to quickly reframe that kind of gets back in that positive mindset after you've had that little bit of a negative experience.
I like that too, because it shows them that you believe in them. You know, we're still a family. We're treating you like family, right?
Yes, it really helps to preserve that sort of dignity, whereas you are going to have to, provide those consequences, but those consequences don't reflect my perception of you as a person. My perception of you as a person is still positive. It's still good. There's still optimism and potential that I believe in.
Yes, that's definitely true. And that's just a little extra we can throw in there. We might not have thought of that before, but just giving them that little bit of believing in, I believe in you, so you have to believe in you.
I think
I would just like to add, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
No, go ahead. That's fine.
Elizabeth.
I was just going to say, moving forward to this next school year, I think that now more than ever, setting up those expectations and those positive beliefs. I'm teaching at the middle school level. Half of our students were a black box all school year, if we saw them at all. Mm-hmm. So they've had over a year to be out of the practice of having rituals, routines, practices. So I think this is just so helpful for me as a reset of my mind too about how am I going to tackle this come August for this new, very different start of school year.
I think you're correct because we are really in a transition period and we have us. And it seems like as we went through our teacher prep programs, we were always taught you have to be firm, you have to be strict. And now the research shows us it's okay to love them. It's okay to just be a real human, and love them to death. And, they're going to need a good balance of that. I definitely agree.
And that's exactly what I was going to say, Elizabeth, is what you said, that this coming school year is going to be very challenging for you all as teachers. And there almost needs to be like a debriefing period where you use these morning meetings because a lot of these kids haven't been around other kids in a long time. They've only been with their families, and they're going to need that time to decompress and to be reminded of what it's like to be in a structured environment again. And all the issues these kids had before, on the hierarchy, their basic needs. There's been deaths they've experienced due to COVID, illness that they themselves or their family members have had. Poverty has probably been heightened, because parents have lost jobs. Everybody's been stuck together in the home, whereas before, students got a break from a poor home environment by coming to school and having some positive reinforcement and community and that kind of thing. And here they've been at home, some of them for a year and a half, having everything magnified. So have a bunch of students coming back to school this year who have literally been traumatized. There's going to be a lot of needs for these kids, and we're going to need, as a school community, we need to know what resources our schools have, because you as teachers can't do it all by yourselves. You're going to need some support.
And, Amy, I'm glad you said that because you all as educators are going to experience trauma yourselves, right? Because you're going to hear stories, and you've already done this, right? You're going to hear stories, you're going to experience students that don't return, you're going to find out things. And so, you guys need to look to your administrators because you're going to need debriefing. You're going to need some of that healing yourselves going forward, because these are times that we've never experienced before. We don't know what's around the corner. I will say, the students are going to be, whether they can behave or not, very excited to be back in your room. They are going to be excited and want to be there for the most part, but they're going to have forgotten. They're going to have forgotten the procedures of the schools.
Something that our school is doing, and this is for 7th through 12th grade, the first week that all the students come back, they're treating them, not like kindergartners, but how like the first 2 or 3 weeks of kindergarten, they go through and show them how to walk in a line. Yes. and all of that sort of stuff. Our school has recognized that there is a need for that, and 7th through 12th is going to have that first week just going over drills and what is okay in the cafeteria, what is okay in the classroom, which I'm very thankful for, to have a school system that sees that need, and then also they're willing to actually step up and do it. And they said, there may be no teaching going on that first week, but if we use that time to help them, then our school year is going to be so much better. Kind of like what you're saying with morning meeting, you get it out of your system and then they're ready to be taught. So hopefully we'll have that, and maybe some other schools can have a little bug in their ear to do something like that.
That's excellent. And I challenge you all in those first 2 weeks of school, to really focus on procedures, because there may be a teacher down the hall and he is so excited because he's on week 2 in his reading unit, whatever. But come October, when your students can walk to the cafeteria without you reminding them perfectly, his students may be bouncing off the walls. I don't know. But invest in the kids those first 2 weeks of school and pretend that they've never been to that school before, because it's been a long time, right? And even if you did have them in the building last year, it was, very virtual, very blended. It was just not back 100%. So they all need that refresher. Definitely.
Yeah, and that even goes beyond just knowing what the procedure is, just having it down, knowing just having written right into your brain what's going to happen really provides that safety and security need from Maslow's hierarchy, because there's been a whole lot of, if you don't have those procedures, all you have is chaos, and you have to always be looking over your shoulder, just trying to make sure that you know what's about to happen. When you get those procedures in place, they get a lot more comfortable, that stress comes down, you can kind of get a little bit more into some of that social emotional learning piece that comes next once you've got that safety and security really squared away.
Definitely. Definitely. So I will share with you our last little slide here. And what I would like for y'all to do is, I have my email provided. And so, well, I say that, but this is not the right email. So I guess it's not provided. It's actually at uca.edu. So I'll change that really quickly. And I'll type it in the chat. So here's the correct email. The one on here is another one, but I don't get it very often. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you these questions. So I would like for you to choose 2 of these questions and answer in an email. And if you send me an email, I will send you a list of fabulous resources for you to use for social emotional learning, morning meetings, some of the books I discussed, even some things on adverse childhood experiences and the power of our words. So number 1, how can we use SEL to meet students' basic needs so that they are successful in our classroom? Number 2, why would I want to conduct morning meetings daily? Number 3, how can I support students in crisis in my classroom? Number 4, what are some procedures that I want to incorporate? Number 5, how can I incorporate positive teacher language in my daily routine? And number 6, just any feedback, questions, or other comments you have from the presentation. And what I would like for you guys to do is just email to the correct email is in the chat. Email any 2 of these questions responses to me. And you don't have to do it today. You can do it in the next couple of days. And if I get an email from you, I will send you a list of references. And Melissa is putting in the chat also that information about your PD certificate and the recording of this presentation and how you have access, you'll have access to it on our YouTube channel. So please check that out. She's also put the link for more free summer sessions. Any questions or comments or last minute things you'd like to share? I really enjoyed hearing from you all. I always learn so much when I work with educators. So I love to listen to you and hear what you have to say and get your ideas on things. Okay, so I will put the questions up one more time for you. And as you get these done, feel free to exit the session, and good luck this fall. I think you all will do great. If you implement a couple of these ideas, I think you may find some big changes coming your way.